Okay, today I'm gonna talk about React Redux in React. Okay, so what is React Redux? It's an offshore library to manage global state, whereas Redux is a third party lab. So suppose there is a state gonna be used by all component, many component at the same time. So you're gonna use React Redux, right? So in order to demonstrate how it works, I have drawn a diagram here to show you the workflow. So from the left to right, there is a container component, and inside of the container component there is a UI component. So container versus UI component. Containers contain UI components, and they are parent child component, right? So container component can talk to React Redux. At the same time, if UI component want to talk the React Redux, UI component need to pass the value or state back and forth through container component. So only container component can talk to Redux. UI component are not allowed to write any Redux APIs. And the last thing is, when you can see there are two props in between of UI component and container component. So what these two props work? What is the purpose of these two props? Remember that. So when parent class or parent component wanna pass some value to its child component, you need to pass a prop. And when the child component want to pass something to the parent class, you need to accept a callback function as a prop and pass, so that you can pass value back to its parent component, right? So these two props mean that one of the prop is a prop and another prop is a callback function, so that child component can pass the value or state to its parent component. Okay, UI and the container component talk to each other by props. Right. So now I'm gonna show you again. We're gonna use this as an example. This calculator as an example to show you how to use React Redux. So again, from the left to right, and I'm gonna start with create container component. Okay, so first let's take a look at the source code folder. Yes, there's no containers, right? So we need to create a containers folder, and inside of this there is a count component. This is different from the count component in components folder, because this is a UI component and this is the container component, right? So attach index.js container, right? Import, connect, and use React-Redux. Okay. So first, I'm gonna import connect from React-Redux. Right? Of course, we need to install React-Redux. Back to this diagram, as you can see here, so actually the container component connect to UI and React Redux, right? So this API named connect. But specifically, more specifically, this connect API connects actually the UI component, and these two props at the same time. So I'm gonna show you right here. So what I'm gonna use export default connect. As you can see here, there are two brackets. It means that this connects the higher order function. When you use the first bracket, another function will be returned, and when you use the second bracket, and then the return function will be called again recursively, right? So what is the parameters of these two brackets? The second is count UI. So it means that we put the UI component inside of this container component first. So we need to import this count UI from components count, right? So we have already passed the UI component inside the container, and pass UI component, and pass store to container component. So again, let's let's take a look at this diagram, right? So we have already passed the UI component inside of the container component. Now we want to connect container component with the store object, which also means we want to connect with React Redux. So how do we do that? Using React Redux, we can simply pass the store object right here, store and store, right? Of course, if you want to use that, you need to import store from Redux and store, right? And again, this is not UI component anymore. This is container component, right? So back to the diagram. So we have finished this part. We have finished the UI component part. We have finished the React Redux and a container component connection, and only left is how we define these two props and how to pass it to container components, right? So okay, so actually. As you can see here, this is the purpose of this first bracket. So this first bracket needs two functions. I just name it an A and a B, right? Pass it. As you can see here, so this is the parent component and this is the child component. So container component and UI component, right? So it is pretty straightforward. So now you need to declare two functions to make these two components can talk to be able to talk to each other, right? So two props. Yeah. The first one is mapStateToProps. Okay. A and B, right? So function A, we pass the state to UI component or child component, which is the second arrow on the bottom, the second prop on the bottom, this one, right? So we pass the prop from parent component container to child component UI, right? So we declare this prop first. So this is a pass the state to UI component. So this one you need to return the state. So how do we get the state? Normally we do state store.getState, right? Store.getState. But in this case, we don't have to do that. Why? Because this is the API React Redux provided to us. So it means that when you declare this callback function, so state has already been passed into this function automatically. This is API of React Redux. And React Redux wants you to pass the state, which you get from store.getState to your child component UI. Then it will help you. React Redux will help you. So it gives you a state. So what does this mean? mapStateToProp. So you name it as A. It's fine. It's okay. You can name it whatever you want. But actually, it doesn't really make any sense, right? So React Redux has provided us an offshoot name of this function. It's called mapStateToProps. Back to diagram again. Redux pass the store.getState, which is the state, and a container accept the state and pass this state as a prop to its child component UI, right? So we map the state to prop. This is what I mean. What I mean. Pass the state. Pass state to child component UI. Map state has already passed state as a parameter when you declare this function, right? So there is another function called mapDispatchToProps. Yeah, it's very again, let's take a look at this diagram. So now we declare the first prop on the top, right? So this is a callback function, right? And using this callback function, the child component UI can pass the value user input back to its parent component container, right? So we just declare some callback function. That's it, right? So we map. In this case, what we do, it is a callback function to dispatch the action, right? So we call it mapDispatchToProp. So pass. So this one also return object, and this object will return some function. This object contains several callback functions. So increment value, right? You pass the user input value to value, and you dispatch an action, right? So first thing is this one. We should store.dispatch, right? But we don't have to do it for manually, because again React Redux has already done this for us. So we have already get the dispatch when we declare this callback function. So we don't need to import this store.dispatch anymore. We can use dispatch directly. But now you need a dispatch an action. Oh, it cannot pass the action automatically, right? So you need to import this out manually. So the lucky thing is we have already got declare all those actions ourselves from last class, right? So it's all right here. Now we just import these actions. So increment action, decrement action, async increment action. Okay. So from dot redux action. Now we can use that increment action, and we can get the value and dispatch this, right? Where do we get value? We use this.prop dot increment, and then we pass user input as value, right? So pass callback function to child component to get value from user input, and map dispatch to prop has already passed dispatch as a parameter when you declare. And ABCD, the last thing is import actions, right? So besides increment, we have decrement, we have async increment, decrement action, async increment action. AYSY increment action. What's wrong here? Oh, okay. And right here, you don't need these two parameters. You don't need these two names anymore, and instead you need to use the offshoot name props map dispatch to props. Okay. Okay. Okay, we need to go back to now. We need to use these props, right? So back to the diagram again. So we have already declared. We have already made connection with container component and React Redux. We have already made connection with UI component and container component. Now we have already finished the container part. We're gonna go back to the UI part. So UI component right here instead of this. So go back to our notes. It says UI components are not allowed to write any Redux API, right? So you don't need this, you don't need this, you don't need this, and this. Instead, we got those values and callback functions from prop. So I want to display this prop. Yeah. What's wrong here? Count, UI count, index. Turn 0. Okay. Okay. So console, we print the prop. As you can see here, so value count, right? This key value pair. This is the state value we pass from container to UI, and these are several callback functions that we can get the value from user input and pass it to container component, right? So now let's use it. So first, when we display it, we display props.count, right? This is the value, and with this we use this callback functions. So increment. This is a callback function, right? So this dot input dot value multiply by 1, and yep. So decrement, right? Increment, and this one is this dot props dot async increment. This dot input dot value multiply by 1. Okay. Now we have already defined this successfully. Let's go back to this and try if it works. Oh, it's so fast. Why? Because we forgot to pass a timer here, right? So let's give it 1 second, right? And instead of this, we need to accept timer, and we look at this action, right? So this is the async increment action, right? So it will just accept the data as well as a timer to start a set time up timer. Okay, let's go back to this, refresh the page. I click 1 second. Yeah, if odd, minus add, yeah. So it works, right? So it means that we have successfully built up our container component, and it connects to the UI component successfully. And yeah, we get the state from store right here when by passing a prop to container component, right? So it works. Now we need to optimize our code. Yeah. So back to this. Let's back to. So we don't need this diagram, and back to. Okay, we start from our container component. As you can see here, oh, you may ask me like, hey, when I do this using Redux independently, it didn't require so much coding. But when you use another when you are using offshore React Redux, it requires more coding. It's so heavy. So why? Yeah, that's a good question. So we use something because we want to reduce reduce the map power instead of raising the map power, right? So let's just clean this code a little bit. So this code right here above this mapStateToProp can also be written like this: const a state and something like count state, right? Something like this in one line. So it's the same thing as this one, right? So now we can just copy this and pass it into here, into here directly, right? So we don't need this code anymore. And how do we optimize this map dispatch, right? So right here, you can write it as, you can pass an object here. Maybe you will ask me, hey, you tell me that you need, I need to pass 2 functions in the first bracket, and now you pass a object right into this. This is this is what you have told me. Yeah. So why this works? Because this is a API level optimization. So you just can do this. You just simply can do this. When you declare this object, you can just do callback function name and increment action. That's it. That's it. And callback function name and create action. That's it. That's what you want to do. You don't need a values arrow bracket. No, you don't need nothing. They will just do it for you. They will just do it for you. That's it. So not they will do it for you. I mean React-Redux will do it for you. So you just declare a callback function and pass the value of this k is the creation the action creation name or variable. That's it. So we don't need this anymore. That's it. Let's take a look. So async. So I think this one is a little bit too fast. So okay, sorry. Decrement action. Async increment action. That's it. Take a look again. 1 second. Yeah, 1 second. Okay. If odd minus add. Yeah, it works, right? So the second thing is remove subscribe and provider. So second optimization happens on root component. A file entry first. So using React Redux, you don't need to subscribe this anymore. This looks ugly, right? You use Redux, you want to subscribe to a subscribe store object. That's it. And when the store object change, all the components will be notified and will be re-rendered. And yeah, but using React Redux, you don't to subscribe store for you. So why? Because container component has already done this for us, right? So another thing is when we come to this root component, as you can see here, so there is a count, right? So imagine there's another component which needs to subscribe store change, listen to stores change. You gotta pass this again, right? Demo 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, and you pass the store object to the component who have subscribe store one by one. This is insane, right? This is not quite right. So how do we do this? We do provider. So provider is a wrapper to wrap your component. Then all the components who have subscribe store object, when the state has changed, all those components will be notified. So it is so we want to use it, we need to import provider from React Redux, right? So we just pass store here. That's it. So all the other components who have subscribe store would be notified when state change, right? And the last thing is container and UI components. Okay, again, let's take a look at this. So we have two components with same name, count, right? So in order to so if we want to use the React Redux, we need to just create another folder and create another component with same name, which is ridiculous, right? So if you have only one component which needs to talk to React Redux, that's fine. If you have 40 components which needs to talk to React Redux, so you need to create another 40 folders. It becomes 80 in total, right? So it sounds like this is not quite right. So what should we do? We come to the UI component. We just copy all this. Okay. Why do I still use store? We shouldn't use store anymore. Yeah, right here. This.props.account. Right? Okay. No. We just copy this to container component, and we rename this UI component as component UI. We don't need to import this anymore, and we just use it instead of this. Instead of this component directly, in this container component directly, right? Now we can use it directly. We don't need to just create another folder, right? And import this and put that into container. So it means that we don't need this anymore. Delete, right? So one second, if odd, minus add 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10. All right, so yeah, this is pretty much about React Redux today. Compared to Redux, we have talked about from last class. Normally, basically you need to know, you have the basic knowledge of Redux, then you can proceed to React Redux. Yeah, so yeah, this is pretty much about the React Redux today. Thanks.